So our lead this hour is from Pro Bouncy Ball. Yeah, not a game, but a story around it. So the talk of the NBA, the ratings have been amazing. People are fascinated by change and Luka, now a Laker, and just a giveaway by the Mavericks. It's almost unprecedented in the modern era that you would just give away a player of that stature and not allow other teams to bid on that player, but it happened. And it's just a wild story. So Dallas continues to circle the drain, and every single day there's a new story out, which is pretty much rehashing the same storyline that the Dallas basketball team had major issues with Luka. And they involve his use of different substances, his overconsumption of food, not working out, not doing the things that are supposed to be done as a pro athlete. A lot of complaining about Luka smoking the hookah and drinking beer, a lot of beer. So if you haven't heard the latest on this, the latest story, again, it's much of the same that people around the Mavericks who have followed Luka, in the final couple of months with Dallas, they paint a mosaic of a fallen athlete, and the story's buried behind a paywall, calling him lazy, saying that despite doing everything they could to help Luka get in shape, he just didn't follow the plan, and they kept mentioning that he's a bit of a social butterfly, and he has quite the palate, and he'd be very happy, Luka, just having a diet of equal parts beer and equal parts hookah. And that has been a point of consternation for the Mavericks, and not just them. Apparently, according to the story I was reading here, a bunch of NBA types, they say it goes all the way back to when he was in Real Madrid as a teenager and then entered the NBA draft. And so the story predicting that Luka is on the cusp of a basketball apocalypse, that essentially everyone's all excited and they're singing the praises of Luka, but this is not going to end well, and you're heading towards Dante's Inferno because of his lifestyle choices, that it is going to be a Armageddon for long-term success, in that he has a shelf life of essentially 5 years or so. That around 5 years from now, it's all over. So let us discuss the question. How do you pick apart the latest reporting of Luka Dončić being obsessed with hookah and booze, and he's only got about 5 years left, and then everything's going to go kaplooey? So I've got piano, Dirty Birds, and the Big O. And we will combine all of these things together, and we are going to talk to the hand is what we're going to do. Because if you don't listen, I'm talking to my hand. Hi, hand. Yeah. All right. So number one. I said number one. My first reaction is this is demonic. And I would argue that if you went to the Lakers and said you can trade for Luka, give up broken down Anthony Davis, but Luka's only going to play well for 5 years. Let's say that report is right. Let's say Luka only has 5 good years left, and by the time he gets to about 30, 31, something like that, it's over. You'd still make the trade, right? You'd rather have 5 years of Luka playing elite basketball or hitting every hookah bar and drinking all the beer he can get his hands on. You'd take that right now. But I am fascinated by the Mavericks continuing to be on the warpath here, and I get it. I mean, they're getting absolutely cooked because Luka's starting to play better, and the Lakers have won a lot of these games, and so they're just getting hammered by all directions, and so they're fighting back. There's a faction with the Dallas Mavericks, and they're on the offensive here. They've gone from a defensive posture to an offensive posture, and they're hell-bent on dropping a piano on top of the head of Luka. And they want to vaporize him, much like Luka vaporizes that delicious hookah. which he loves so much. Now, they're bizarrely looking to take credit for the Luka deal. It's like, well, he's going to be bad in 5 years. It's like, okay. Well, that's 5 years from now. Right now, it's fine. And it wasn't even a trade. Again, I keep saying trade. It was a silent auction, but there was only one bidder. They traded, again, gave away Luka for a player who is older and doesn't even have 5 good years left in him in Anthony Davis, but at least Anthony doesn't love hookah. The unibrow, not a big beer guy, I guess, and he does have a VIP card to the trainer's room. So there's that. All right, now, page 2. If this reporting about the many vices is accurate, so what does that mean big picture for the Mavericks? And what does that mean for Luka Doncic going forward? So we'll start with Dallas. It means for the Mavericks, that the brass there, that they are saying, hey, we did a solid for the franchise. We did a solid for the franchise. And it sounds to me like they're doing a carbon copy of a 30-plus-year-old story. God, it might be 40 years old. Right out of the Dirty Birds playbook. It's story time on the Ben Maller Show. So let's go back in the hot tub time machine. We'll set the year to the early 90s. Different time, no social media. Bill Clinton was the president, different world. So at that time, former Falcons coach Jerry Glanville, at that time he was the Falcons coach, and he decided to trade a young quarterback named Brett Favre. Brett Favre would go on to be a Hall of Fame quarterback with the Green Bay Packers. And Jerry Glanville, for years, has defended the decision to trade Brett Favre to Green Bay, saying that while he coached him in Atlanta, Brett Favre was a raging alcoholic. He couldn't sober him up, and sent him. Glanville's argument is we sent him to a city in Green Bay in the famous line where at 9 o'clock at night, the only thing that's open is Chili Joe's. You can get it 2 ways, with or without onions, and that's it. And then Brett Favre went on to have a Hall of Fame career. And Glanville's argument is I could have traded him to New York. I could have traded him to the Jets, Brett Favre. And nobody, Glanville says, to this day would have known who Brett Favre ever was. Now, the obvious difference, you know what the difference is? Yes, the obvious difference is the Mavericks, if they wanted to completely copy Jerry Glanville with Brett Favre, they would have traded Luka to where? The Utah Jazz, which is the Green Bay equivalent in the NBA, right? If you had said, all right, Luka, he's a fat slob and he drinks too much and he smokes too much hookah, so we're going to help him out. We're going to send him to Salt Lake, and that's it. But instead, they send him to La La Land. So if you've got problems with vices in L.A., as they say in Hollywood, the ski slopes are always open in those Hollywood hills. It's always skiing in Hollywood, if you know what I mean. Now, Los Angeles, I looked it up. They are a hotbed. I didn't realize this because I'm not a hookah guy, but there are tons of hookah lounges. If you are a hookah enthusiast, they've got rooftop lounges. They've got speakeasy hookah bar. They got all kinds. They got hookah Luka. They got all kinds of hookah. And speaking of that, for Luka, now we had given him the nickname Luka the Lemon, Lemon Luka, but we have to change that. I like this nickname better. I now, by the powers invested in me in Overnight Talk Radio, I give Luka Doncic the nickname Hookah Luka. Does anyone have a problem? No one has. That's a great name, right? Hookah Luka. That's his new nickname, Hookah Luka. That's awesome. That's his name. On this show, Hookah Luka. That's it. It's got a great ring to it, flows off the tongue. All right, final point. We now go to Philadelphia, where the cheesesteaks are great, the pretzels are wonderful, and the basketball blows. Podcasting's pretty good. Not anymore, though. We've learned that podcaster Paul George is taking a break from his main job to focus on his side hustle. You know, the one in the NBA? Yeah. This is not satire. I saw this. I was like, well, it's probably that Centel. No, that's not. So PG-13. PG-13, that's his code name. We love him because he's no longer a Clipper. He said, this is a quote, I want to let the podcast P family. Is there a Podcast P family? He says, I want to let him know that after the latest episode, I plan to take a break from the pod, Paul George said, just to focus on getting my body right, getting mentally right, and, help this squad make a push towards our goal, he said, to finish the season and give ourselves a chance to be in contention to compete for a championship. Which, you're like, has Paul George has he been paying attention? Does he understand that the Sixers suck? Maybe he thinks they're good and he doesn't realize they've lost most of these games. Now, Philadelphia did play on Wednesday night. They had a garden party. They had a garden party on Wednesday night and against those Knickerbockers. And while Paul George, actually played pretty well, we know what happened. The team from New York won yet again. So, Paul George pausing his fledgling podcast career as the Sixers crash and burn. That is blank. So, I'll fill in the blank. I jotted down the big O that Paul George pausing his podcasting as the Sixers crash and burn is the big O. And I'm not talking about Oscar Robertson. I'm talking about obtuse. It's a big word, obtuse. So why does one have to announce they're no longer doing the podcast or they're taking a break? Why not just take a break? It's like sometimes people will love this show and then I'll say something to piss them off and they'll say, I am no longer listening to your show. I'm like, I don't care. If I go to a restaurant and I like the restaurant and then I stop going to the restaurant, I don't call the restaurant up and say, I'm no longer eating at your restaurant. I just don't go. Why does one have to announce I'm not doing the podcast right now? Unless he got the tap on the shoulder and somebody for the Sixers is like, dude, you're killing us. You're playing like an absolute turd, and then you go on the podcast and it's ridiculous. You talk about a lack of self-awareness without telling me that you have a lack of self-awareness. I mean, nobody will miss it. I don't know anyone that listens to it. Jock podcasts are a dime a dozen. They're almost all the same. The Jock podcast. Podcast P has had more uploads than baskets for the Sixers. That's an amazing factoid. Despite making $50 million from his side hustle playing in the NBA, he's more focused on his main gig, Podcast P. The math ain't mathing, but now he's taking a break.